Hey everybody, it's Matt from the house, and in this video we're going to talk to you a little bit about bearing spacers and little washers that come with your trucks and what they do and why you should use them. Let's check this out. All right, so if don't you got yourself a skateboard and you buy yourself a set of trucks and it's got these little tiny washers on there, or sometimes you buy a set of bearings and it's got these spacers that come with them, and not all of them come with it, but some of them do, and a lot of people don't realize those actually serve a really good purpose, and definitely shouldn't throw them out. They're there for a reason, and they supply them for a reason as well. Especially when you get into some higher end bearings, having your spacers and your washers makes a huge difference. So right off, on your skateboard, obviously when you're putting everything together and you put the bearings inside your wheels, and then you go ahead and you tighten this down, and it gets to a point where you tighten it to the point where the wheel won't spin. So you constantly, you back it off just a little bit. Just basically back that off just a tiny little bit at a time until that wheel spins freely on its own. So with that, there might be just a little bit of play in your bearings, and that's something that you want the least amount. You don't want a lot of play in your bearings. If you wiggle it, you can feel it moving a lot, or you can actually move the wheel up and down on the axle a lot. That's not good. What that basically translates into is your bearings blowing out, putting unnecessary stress on your bearings, and it makes your bearings so they don't actually last as long, and your board doesn't roll as smooth too. That's what the bearing washers and, the bearing spacers and the truck washers come into play. So your bearing, you basically have your outer ring, you have your inner ring, and then inside there's balls in the raceway there. Sometimes they have shields on one side or both sides. But if you hold the bearing and you just hold that inner axle kind of part of it, and you can spin the bearing freely, but as long as you're not touching anything on the outside. The minute you touch something on the outside, it doesn't spin. So that's where this comes into play. When you actually are using these washers are basically the exact same size as that inner kind of axle piece on your bearing. Then the spacer is the same size as well, and that goes in between your bearings. So basically what we're doing is when you go washer, bearing, spacer, bearing, and then spacer on top, basically what that's doing is it's actually kind of creating an axle and taking the inside of that bearing, and it's actually linking it flawlessly with your other bearing and also with your truck. Why that's important is when you don't have these washers, the outside of the axle or the hanger there of your truck can actually, if you tighten it up too much, it can actually touch the shields on your bearings. Likewise the nut as well, and that can create, bearings that, will slow down over time. Also, your wheel is made out of a, urethane material, which, depending on the hardness of your wheel, even at the high-end harnesses in your 101 to 103s, you still can tighten it down and actually pull that bearing into the wheel a little bit, and it doesn't sit right. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna put a washer on the outside. Then we're gonna put in a bearing. So now we've got the truck is touching the washer, but the washer is only touching the inside of the bearing. Then we add the spacer in between, and again, that's only touching the inside of the bearing. Then what we're gonna do is we're actually going to, and I still have the washer here, we're gonna throw on the other bearing, and boom. So now we actually have a truck touching a washer, touching the inside of the bearing, touching a spacer, which is touching the inside of both bearings, and then we do another washer on the outside, which is only touching the inside of the bearing on the outside of the wheel. And now when we put that nut on there and we tighten this down, you don't have to tighten this down like crazy tight, but when we get this thing so it's nice and snug, now the wheel still spins freely, but there's absolutely zero play. There's no wiggle. So one, this makes your, wheels roll smoother. Two, it also helps keep them from blowing out over time. You know, they're still going to wear out. You're still going to get standard wear and tear on your bearings. But if your wheel isn't wiggling around and your bearings aren't wiggling around and getting that unnecessary wear and tear, they're going to last longer. And then also, when you can tighten this down and your wheel still spins freely, that just means that the nut is not going to come loose. I don't know if I've had it happen to me before where that nut comes loose and it falls off while you're riding and your wheel goes rolling off, and then you end up damaging your truck, falling and getting hurt, any number of issues. We want to have that nut. We want to make sure that that stays nice and tight and that nylon can really grab a hold and stay on there all day long. So while you're skating, you don't have to worry about anything else. All right, well, thanks for checking out our video on bearing washers and the spacers and why you should use them and how to use them and how they work too. And if you've got any questions about these or any other bearings or skate stuff we've got, thehouse.com, leave us some comments down below. We're on there every single day trying to answer your questions. We want to make sure that we not only get you the right equipment, we want to make sure that it lasts you a long time and that it's being used properly too. Like, subscribe, make sure to get that bell on too so you can find out when all the new videos drop. And no matter what wheels, bearings, or skateboard you've got, get out and ride, because any day of riding is a good day of riding.